Hi there. Once again, this is Peter Litchfield and Sandra Reamer and Wolfgang Fellner. And we're ready for our next interesting conversation. Since you'll remember, this is not about making presentations, it's about having a discussion and getting to know what other people think in regards to breathing, what they're doing in the breathing world, and so on. And so, again, we're a nonprofit, and the three of us are on that board of the nonprofit. We're always looking for contributions, by the way. If you're in the mood for helping out, people in a nonprofit entity to help us bring this to as many people as possible, you can go to our website as a subscriber, make a contribution there. But today, we're very fortunate to have Lynn Bristow with us here today. She's had some major adventures, let's say, in her life around healthcare, specifically COVID. And she is one of those many, many people who have been suffering with long COVID kinds of symptoms. Lots of controversy about that. Lots of people out there who are suffering in major ways. And I think that we have something really profound to offer to those people. And I say that partly because of Lynn and how she has benefited by bringing breathing science to her own life. And we're going to hear about that today. She's very motivated to get the word out, and we want to do what we can to make that possible in every way. So we're going to start today by having Lynn describe her experience. That is the COVID, the long COVID, and how she suffered through that, and how she's been able to manage it. And then we will enter into a conversation with her, asking her questions. We may stop her along the way to clarify things or to talk a little bit more about something, and so on. So this will be a discovery process. It will be a lot of fun, very interesting, and as I say, as conversational as possible. So let's start by turning it over to Lynn.
Thank you so much for inviting me on today. I really wanted to come on just in hopes that my experience might help someone else. I feel like I'm very similar to so many people. My symptoms, just the things I say, which I'll tell you about, it's just what I hear. I'm on Facebook. I'm more a stalker and watch than contribute, but I've been, watching for a long time. So there's a lot of people out there, a lot of people with my symptoms, very similar to me. So I feel like this has helped me, and I want to make sure people know about it. So I do want to say that even before COVID, something was wrong with me, but it wasn't life-changing. It was irritating. It was enough that I went to a lot of doctors, but I never got any help. Nobody ever could find anything. And that went on pretty much since I got pregnant. So my first pregnancy brought it on. And anyways, and then in 2020, I got a very mild case of COVID. And I was basically just tired, maybe lost smell and taste, but it was very mild. And then it was about 3 months later that I started having all these crazy symptoms come on. I had like internal vibrations, which most people would be like, what is that? But I tell you, there's a lot of people who know exactly what that is. Electrical feeling, tingling, pressure at the top of my head. My head was always felt like I had something heavy on it. Extreme fatigue, overall feeling of being unwell. Tinnitus. I had screaming tinnitus that would change all the time. When I woke up, it was the worst. And I didn't have that before.
Ringing in the ears, just for some people who might not know.
Ringing in, yeah, or tinnitus. tinnitus, tinnitus, same thing, ringing in your ear. Yeah, ringing in your ears. Mine was really in my head, and I almost call it static because the noise, it's not like a ringing like I would think of tinnitus, but it's noise in my head, so tinnitus. Um, I'd have this weird sore throat, pain on the top of the roof of my mouth, um, total right side weakness. I woke up a couple times and went to the ER twice because I felt like I was having a stroke. My whole right side just wasn't working right. Um, I'd have terrible pain in my legs, the muscles of my legs. And the list just went on. And a lot of the symptoms were just bizarre. I mean, just like you can't make up some of this stuff. It was horrifying. There was a chunk of time that it was just even hard for me to get out of bed. I remember getting in the shower and trying to wipe down the shower door, and that amount of energy would just put me right back in bed. I just had no energy. At one point, a couple years in, I felt like I was almost better, enough that I was out mountain biking and I fell and I broke my wrist. And then I had a surgery and it all came back. Um, so from the beginning, I always noticed my nights were the worst. I would wake up the worst. And then I would get better during the day, not completely better, but better. Little things would set me off, like if an alarm went off on our house, or trying to deal with insurance on the phone, just mental things would make my symptoms worse. So I'm going to say this. I know Dr. Litchfield doesn't like these words, but it felt like I was having autonomic nervous system problems. I just felt so triggered, so stuck in an elevated state. That's how it felt. And I see that all over in the groups, those same words being used. Um, I mean, I feel like I know what that is now. But like going up a flight of stairs, I would have to take a couple steps at a time and I'd have to rest. That's how low energy I was. I couldn't take like 3 steps at a time, um, which was crazy. It was horrifying. I was using a scooter because I couldn't walk. So if I did have to go to the store, which my family did most of the shopping, but if I had to run in, I had to use a scooter because getting to the door was more work than I could do. Um, so fast forward 5 years. So
I,
all of that went
I,
on. Go
I,
ahead. Hmm.
and I have something because I think that's so important to say because you started out saying nobody was able to find anything, right? At the very beginning. And
That's
I think it's
right.
so important to say that when in the field of breathing, we very often work with medically unexplained physiological symptoms.
That is
So
such a good thing to say. Yes.
yeah, so there is a box you can put that into. So it's just to mention that, okay, there is a way to talk about those things. And the fact that they are medically not explained does not, immediately imply that the symptoms cannot exist. Because when, when you go to the physician and they don't have an explanation for it, you might feel that they are jumping to that conclusion, right? And that is not supportive very often, right? Because it might give you the sensation there is something wrong with you and with your perception of your body, rather than, okay, acknowledging the symptoms you have and trying to, you know, connect the dots and what the causal links and the origins of those symptoms might be. So I just wanted to mention that because, in behavioral medicine or in breathing science, we work with so many different symptoms, and everybody who knows the list of symptoms, Peter very often shows in all his trainings, he shows those lists of symptoms that might be brought upon, for example, by low CO2 levels. And it's a huge list, right? So it's never so easy to identify things. So, but the fact that they are not medically explained doesn't, it doesn't devalue them or doesn't say they cannot exist. There are medically unexplained physiological symptoms. Thank you for talking about that.
I think that was one of the hardest things for me the first year. I went to every doctor. I went to probably 8 neurologists. I went to some of the best hospital neurologists, and one of them told me that I was fine. Everything was just fine. And my husband was with me, and I think my jaw fell to the floor. I'm like, did you not hear any of these things I just said that are happening to me? But because all of their tests that they ran, which I've had all the tests run, came back normal, there was nothing wrong with me. And I think that that's actually that stress of having all those doctors tell you there's nothing wrong with you, or, nobody told me I was depressed or anxious. Nobody did that, but I know a lot do tell people that. And I think that's the worst thing you can do for somebody in my position, because I think mine is triggered by stress, and that's just bringing on more stress, right? So I think I finally found a doctor about a year in, that he had the best bedside manner. He is the best doctor. And that just made a world of difference to me, knowing somebody had my back, that I didn't have to keep searching, that somebody was going to look after me. But it did go on for 5 years. But it was easier, so much easier, having somebody that listened to me and didn't say I was fine, that acknowledged what I was feeling. It just made really all the difference. So that's a hard thing for people. I see that all over the place. That, to me, that's the worst thing. The worst thing, because you're struggling with something that has no hope. And the thing that really helped me was, after a while, I figured out they called it long COVID, which took a while. It wasn't, when I first got sick, it wasn't, oh, you have long COVID. And I think one of my ER visits, one of the doctors came in and said, hey, there's something called long COVID. You might look into that. And that was the first time I had heard that. And I got on Facebook, which I'm not a Facebooker, and there are so many people with this. And that was actually really helpful. Nobody had any answers, but at least there were other people like you. So yeah, but anyway, so fast forward 5 years. So 5 years I struggled. My doctor sent me to Dr. Rama, and I talked to him a couple days ago. So I told him I was going to be on. He's a sleep doctor in California at Sleep and Brain. And I went to see him, and he ran every test that could affect sleep. And one of the tests was a CO2 test. At the time, I had no idea what CO2 was. I mean, I had never heard of that. So while he had me hooked up, he said that I had hypocapnia, that my CO2 was in the low 20s. He said it was the way I was breathing. And I couldn't believe that, because I couldn't recognize that I was doing anything with my breathing. I didn't feel like I was. So he recommended a BiPAP machine and that I go to a breathing coach. So immediately, that BiPAP machine, when I got it, it was miraculous. I mean, I knew like in 5 days I bought one, because it was that miraculous for me. Most of my symptoms calmed down. They haven't completely gone away. There's still like tiny traces of them. I'm still working on. That's why I called him, is I'm still tweaking my BiPAP machine, trying to perfect it. I've been trying to wear well, I guess I'm jumping ahead, but anyways, and then he recommended I go to a breathing coach. So then I saw Lisa, that was trained at your school. And
You're making reference to the Professional School of Behavioral Health Sciences,
yes,
where she was trained and is a faculty member, and where the three of us are also faculty members there, in addition, just so you know. And Lynn just attended one of our webinars this past weekend on high performance and breathing. And that's where she saw a list of all these symptoms that can be associated with the deregulation of carbon dioxide while breathing. And she just reinforced her thinking.
Yes. Well, I had worked with Lisa, but boy, I got a lot of information. It was very interesting this weekend. Very interesting. So I started working with Lisa, and she's wonderful. I was probably her hardest client ever because we'd start the session with me doubting everything. And she'd have to talk me into it each time, and answer my 100 questions, and then we could get on with trying to fix my breathing. But anyways, I started using a Capno Trainer Go, and this little machine just allows you to be able to watch your CO2 in real time. And mine was horrible. It was horrible. Um, I don't know what happened, why that happened to me, why, what else is involved, if there's something else involved. But I know that if I didn't fix that, I was not going to get better. So it was significant. I believe that the low CO2 was significant in this. I don't know if it's all of it or not, but it's significant. And now I'm pretty much living a normal life. I still struggle at night, and I'm working with Dr. Rama on that. I wish I could change my breathing at night. I don't know how to do that. I'm trying, but it's hard when you're sleeping to change something you're doing.
Well, what you
So,
do during what you learn during the day, the way you breathe during the day, can have a major impact on how you breathe at night. They're not mutually exclusive. They work together. So
and I'm
whatever you
hoping
do,
that, yes. Yeah,
right.
I'm hoping that I mean, I'm aiming for a high CO2. I don't want 36, I want high.
It
So
can
I'm
only help
hoping
you.
when,
Right. So are
I'm
you still
hoping that
working with Lisa? Are you still working with Lisa Kush?
I haven't talked to her in a while because I went on vacation and I had the class this week. I've just been trying to struggle to get back to at work. But yes, I will continue working with her. I do want it high. They hooked me up during the class this weekend, and it was pretty good at first, and then it kind of trickled down. But I do hope that when I get it under control during the day, that'll go over to my night. Um, Definitely, I hope that. Um, but I just
Yeah,
wanted to come on. Go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in, Lynn, because I really appreciate what you were sharing about not recognizing that CO2 was low. And then here's a test, and you can see that it is low, but how do you put that together with the experience? So that's just, it's very common because people who have lived with low CO2 for a long time, they they habituate to it, many of them, and it's hard to even notice. Is this really, could this really be true? Could the CO2 be low? So to be able to measure becomes really important because there are a lot of people who don't measure, and you're just left with guessing. So we're real advocates for having data and having it in real time, like you were able to experience seeing your CO2 change in real time. So I was wondering, when you noticed that the CO2 was low, and it sounds like you were able to elevate your CO2 as well at different times, what did you notice that helped you recognize that it was low versus when it's higher? Were there
Oh,
changes?
definitely. If my CO2 is low, I mean, I have gut issues. I'm tired. I mean, I can see this, just I can I can feel it. But I'm on this. I've been working on this for 9 months. This is like my job, making sure I fix this, but it's a lot of work. It's not been easy. So yeah, no, I 100% believe that these symptoms, if I don't use my BiPAP machine, I have periodically not used it, and I definitely wake up, my tinnitus is screaming, and I'll have like this electrical feeling, and my legs do weird things. It's definitely, I think what the BiPAP does is it makes it, it's blowing air. So you can't take these really short breaths because you got to suck the air in. And I think I was just like breathing like this. Um, so I think that's why the BiPAP is helping so much.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, there's someone
Yeah.
who just asked a question. I'll read to you. It says, what can mouth taping do during the night for Lynn? I noticed that mouth taping gave me a more calm way of breathing. But when I'm trying to read it here, when I wake up still with mouth taping on, I feel the stress coming up in my body. That's just a comment that someone made, just so you know. And
So
that was,
I
oh,
don't breathe through my mouth. I'm not a mouth breather at all. So during the night, I don't breathe through my mouth. Um, so I don't know how mouth taping would affect me because I'm not a mouth breather. But I don't.
yeah, that's very interesting to say because a lot of people just think that somehow, the issue that one of the issues is that you're mouth breathing while you're sleeping. And here's an example of someone who does not breathe through their mouth at all while
No,
they're
yeah,
awake or asleep, and they have the same problem. Taping the mouth at best is a band-aid, and that's what it is, of course. It's a band-aid that goes over your mouth. It's at best a band-aid. It's not a solution. It's not, the cause isn't that you have your mouth open. The cause is something else. And when you talk about sleep and breathing, it's a complex issue. There's not just one thing that can be that's involved. And but the way that you breathe during the daytime can have a major impact on what happens at night. Now, when I say the way you breathe during the daytime, I don't mean in general. Basically, your breathing changes radically all day long, depending on where you are, who you're with, what's happening, the emotions you're experiencing, and all kinds of things. And there are habits that we learn that we've mentioned many times before. Habits have triggers. They all have triggers or they'd be useless. A habit is about something, it's about a behavior that shows up at a certain time because there's an outcome associated with it that somehow serves that person. Thinking of breathing as a behavior, not just a piece of physiology that you manipulate by putting a band-aid over the mouth. That's no solution. That's like taking an Advil for a headache. There's still a problem. If you get headaches all the time, how are you going to deal with it? It's just dealing with a symptom. So when it comes to breathing during the day, we're talking about how you breathe a certain way at a certain time. And I think, Lynn, I think during that webinar you were at this past weekend, I think I mentioned dreaming, for example, that when someone dreams, when they dream about something in their lives while they're awake, like you can dream about something that scares you, maybe something in your life that's scary to you, and you dream about it, you get scared during the dream because you don't really know you're dreaming. And it's the same thing with breathing. There are habits that you learn that can get triggered while you're actually asleep during REM sleep. And maybe you don't even remember the dream. I mean, how many dreams do you remember? A lot of people don't remember any when there's all kinds of dreams that go on. I remember I used to practice recording my dreams. And as soon as I
oh,
would start to do that, I would remember dozens and dozens of them. I'd be waking up all night writing down my dreams. Okay. So, that this is just one thing. I'm not saying this is the factor. I'm just saying that, the imagery that shows up during dreams is usually related to something significant going on in that person's life. And those significant things can be triggers that then bring on a change in breathing. Well, that's just an example. So if you learn while you're awake, you learn to deal with those challenges so that you don't overventilate and lose carbon dioxide when you're experiencing those things when you're awake. Then when you're sleeping and dreaming, then they're not going to be triggering those. You're not going to get the triggering of that over breathing as well. So it translates. Now, I'm not saying this is true for you, Lynn, and I'm not saying that this is a major consideration in, breathing during sleep. I'm saying it is a consideration that deserves looking at. It's relevant. It's something to be explored, and you can explore it personally on yourself and say, you know what? I think in my case that may be happening because of this, that, and so on. Because before I had long COVID, I had these different symptoms, and they would come on at certain times. And maybe I was overventilating at those times and was lowering the CO2, which was bringing on these symptoms, which then got generalized into my experience with COVID, and it got mixed with that. And then no one has an explanation for these symptoms, but what's bringing on these symptoms are these triggers in the way that I breathe and so on. And maybe that's phasing into what's happening at night. Again, this is interesting, but we're not saying this is true. This is an interesting presentation of an analysis.
Well, it's funny, before I had long COVID, I used to complain to my doctor about my dreaming. I just had so many intense dreams, and I used to tell him I'm not getting any sleep because all the things I'm doing in my dreams, it's not restful. And I'm not sure if I cause the dreaming because I don't have those dreams anymore. So I'm not sure if the way I was breathing brought on maybe anxiety. And so then I'm having these dreams or low oxygen. But I don't have all the dreams that I used to. I used to have crazy dreams all the time, and I don't have those anymore. So
What I point out is that although there are many, many dreams that everybody has at night, they don't remember them because there's a state change, and you try to remember something,
yes.
and it's like drinking alcohol. You have a blackout and you don't remember unless you're drunk, then you can remember. But if you're not drunk, you don't remember. So, transitioning between states is an issue. And why it's important to point that out is because most learning is unconscious. Very little learning is conscious. And so when it comes to breathing and the habits that you learn, generally they're learned unconsciously. Okay, so again, so that these things affect you unconsciously. So it's a question, one of the things in breathing work, the first step is always awareness training. So you become aware of your breathing and how it's interacting with other things. That's always a very first thing that's involved in learning how to work with someone who has breathing issues that are there because of what they've learned. And that really takes me to what you were saying earlier on about how no one was taking you seriously with these symptoms because they kept telling you you were fine. Well, that's because generally what they're looking at is at the anatomy and at what they can see happening. And they aren't addressing the programming of physiology. They're just looking at the physiology, like say they look at the nervous system and they see there's autonomic activity that you made reference to, and they see that there's autonomic activity. Of course there is. If you're anxious, there's autonomic activity. But the problem isn't an autonomic problem. It's the fear that you have and the history that you have and how you develop that fear. And to solve the problem, you don't address the nervous system. You don't go to the nervous system and drug it. You go to what's producing the anxiety, and the concomitant variable that goes with it, of course, is the autonomic nervous system. So if you don't look at the programming in the physiology, you're going to miss everything. So they look at you, everything is normal. Chances are they would never even look at the CO2 level. And so, they don't find anything. So, well, this is in your head, or you don't need to worry about it because it isn't anything. And it's all explained from the perspective of there's something wrong with the machine. There's nothing wrong with the machine. They don't look at how the machine has been programmed, which is fundamental to how we live our lives and what our lives are about. It's all about programming our machinery and what we experience based on that. But there's no addressing that because the medical profession hasn't learned that. They haven't, they aren't in a position to address that because they haven't been trained. There's lots of people connected with me who say, this whole idea of breathing as behavior, as physiology, as behavior needs to be brought to medical schools everywhere. And I've heard this for many years now. Anyway, enough said on my part.
Yeah, I agree exactly with that. They're not looking in the right place, possibly.
Not looking in the right place. They're not looking
Yeah.
at the programming, and the programming isn't always, it shows up when there is a trigger. It's not as if it's permanent. It's permanent, but it's associated with a specific event of some kind, in your past, where you look to find out what it was you learned, what behavior did you learn, when is it triggered, how does it affect you, what can you learn that makes it different? How can you unlearn that? There's no, the medical profession doesn't address it because they aren't trained in unlearning. They aren't trained in how, the system is programmed. And when you look at psychology, where you're looking at programming, so to speak, that all of that is presented on a yet another level, the mental level, rather than understanding how it's embedded in the physiology, how the physiology is a part of that because it's learning along with you all the time.
Believe me, I was in denial. I mean, you can ask Lisa every session. I'm questioning this, and how can this be? How can this be? I mean, I still say that. How can something like this that is so natural? How can we screw it up so bad and hurt ourselves so bad? I don't think for anybody that hasn't listened to you before, maybe you could say what low CO2 does to you. What you have a really interesting slide of a brain where it shows how much reduced oxygen the brain is getting. Maybe you can just share what low CO2 does to the body. And I think that'll explain a lot of my symptoms, like brain fog and extreme fatigue and cognitive issues and even problems with the muscles in my body. It just seems like it explains my symptoms. But maybe you could share what low CO2, what is going on
Well,
when
we
low,
really,
what happens?
in this conversation, we don't want to do a presentation, okay? Because it's
Okay.
about having a conversation
Okay.
with you and learning about you. But I will show that one slide that you're talking about right here. I will just put it up here so people can see it. Right here, I'll share my screen. Here's what happens when someone lowered their CO2 level to a moderately low level. This is over here on the left. It shows the oxygen concentration in the brain, where red is the highest concentration, then yellow, and the deep blue is the least concentration. And by losing CO2, this person lost 30 to 40% of the oxygen content in the brain. It turned almost completely blue. So there's a major, major impact. And this can occur in a matter of seconds. And then that, in a sense, disables you from a standpoint of your being able to focus on what's going on. Then maybe when you lose that focus, you also get what's called disinhibition, where you get a triggering of emotion because the compromise, the neuronal compromise here, you get emotional discharge. You get all those things together. And when people experience that, they may get frightened, they may get really concerned, and they go into a kind of a vicious circle about what they're thinking and feeling and so on, and they're really in trouble. This kind of thing happens very easily. And a good example of it would be like during COVID times, I gave a presentation once to a group of hygienists, of dental hygienists, and about 25% of them had stopped working during the time. The other 75% were still working. And the reason they quit was because of the masks they had to wear, because they said when they wore the mask, they weren't getting enough oxygen and they couldn't breathe, so they couldn't work. Okay. And what they were experiencing is when they put the mask on, they would get air hunger. It's like claustrophobia. A lot of people get claustrophobic when they put a mask on. So they put the mask on, they feel claustrophobic, and then they try to get more air because they feel claustrophobic, and they lose CO2 and they end up like this slide. And then, that convinces them that they're not getting enough oxygen with all the symptoms they get because of the loss of the carbon dioxide, and they don't want, they quit. They discontinue working. 25% of these people stop working because of the way they were breathing, really. Because the other 75% didn't get claustrophobic when they put the masks on, but a quarter of them got severe claustrophobia and felt they couldn't do their work anymore. So if you get someone who has COVID, you're running around with masks like this, people can learn to overventilate and then become claustrophobic in certain situations, and breathing becomes a problem. So they learn dysfunctional breathing by virtue of wearing the mask. So that kind of thing can, really get involved in, how people learn to respond to their environment when they are sick, and how they function when they are sick, like when they do have COVID, and what they do, like wearing masks, and they learn to breathe certain ways. That brings on symptoms, and they attribute the symptoms to something different, not to their breathing. They attribute it to the mask, or they attribute it to COVID, or they attribute it to something like that. And I think in your case, you attributed a lot of what you experienced to the COVID, but really was some of it was a result of the way that you'd learned to breathe, and maybe the way you had learned to breathe previous to having COVID, as you and I once discussed earlier, a couple of months ago.
Yes, the really weird thing is I had a very mild case of COVID and I was fine. And then all of it came on 3 months later, which I was in a couple therapy groups, and that was very common. It wasn't just me that it came on 3 months later. People would say, oh, it came on 3, 4 months later, which is bizarre. I mean, so to me, I have no idea what happened and what happened to millions of people, but I do know I have this problem, and it's breathing. I mean, I believe it. I've questioned it enough. I believe it.
It's not that COVID has caused, bad respiration. It's something you learned as a function of having had COVID or wearing masks or something earlier in your life that got brought to the equation, and then everything got attributed to the COVID because the COVID set the stage for that learning. And then the doctors, of course, aren't looking at that. They're just saying, hey, we don't see anything wrong with you, blah, blah, blah. And that can only make you feel worse and angry, and go to another doctor who does the same
And then
damn
you
thing.
breathe faster.
A good example is a very, very dear friend of mine, David Beals, Dr. David Beals, a physician in the UK. And there was a very famous personality in the UK who had all kinds of symptoms and gone from doctor to doctor, and finally ended up with David. But David took a look at his breathing, and he was severely hypocapnic, at least low CO2 levels that would get triggered, and he would get all these symptoms. And a month later, the man didn't have any symptoms anymore. And so we went to the Royal Society of Medicine, to their national convention, where David presented and had that patient stand up and basically say to the Royal Society of Medicine participants, look, why aren't you looking at the programming in my physiology? Why aren't you looking at the way I was breathing? Because when I went to see Beals, a month later, I'd have this problem for years and it's gone. And he presented that to the Royal Society of Medicine. And there was a group there, it's called the National Institute of Excellence, that looks after the National Health Service and the things that are done there, and got really interested in how, people who lose CO2, how that could be accounting for a lot of the unexplained symptoms that Wolf was making reference to. And that led to their hiring some 10,000 cognitive behavior therapists.
Wow.
This is a huge subject, but let's go back to you. These things, you've triggered these things in me, but we want to let's stay away from me. I have a habit, right, when I get triggered. So let's go back maybe to Wolf and Sandra and see what they have to say.
Yeah, Lynn, can I ask you something? Because
Sure.
we have established that you had a dysfunctional breathing issue, right?
Yes.
And you were also mentioning that there was some autonomic issue that might or might not be associated or contributing to the challenges you had. I mean, I see both things. I see people who are, of course, hypocapnic, have low CO2 values, have problems, all kinds of symptoms. But I also see people who have high CO2 values and have a lot of tension in their breathing. They have a lot of, muscular issues or, autonomic issues. So those two things, they can kind of like Peter was pointing to, they can overlap, they can relate, one can cause the other. I was just curious because I mean that's such an interesting thing, and the complexity is high. So I was wondering what you were referring to, or were you working on that separately, or did everything kind of disappear with working on the breathing chemistry, or did you do anything else that might help with the with any kind of autonomic dysfunction?
I did feel that way, that I was like, and one doctor told me you're stuck in fight or flight, and I thought, well, that's exactly how I feel. And I did try to start relaxing more. I'm really busy. Even when I was sick, I was trying to do as much as I could. We're self-employed, and I was really busy. So I really did try to start, relaxing, meditating, just trying to calm down. And I did try some of the breathing programs that are out there. I did numerous programs out there. Um, I personally think it's my low CO2 that made me feel that way, because I think that it feels bad. I don't know if that's correct, but I don't think I have nervous system problems anymore. I don't think I ever did. I think my breathing was causing that. I really feel that way. Um, yeah, so
It
no, I
makes
wasn't doing anything specific for autonomic nervous system other than, yes, trying to take it easy when I could, but
I think it makes sense, because if you have low oxygen levels, if you have low blood sugar levels, you're kind of always, on the edge of being
yeah,
overwhelmed physiologically.
definitely,
That makes a lot
definitely.
of sense. And if the symptoms, if you manage to regulate your breathing chemistry and the symptoms remain, then there might be another issue, right? That adds up to the breathing chemistry issue. But I think it's really important to separate also the two things, and to work from a behavioral perspective, to work to have the capacity and to be able to work with both things. So I'm happy that working with your breathing chemistry made all the difference for you. So that's amazing when you find the key, when you find the lever that
Well,
can eradicate all kinds of symptoms.
One
I
of the
think
things,
fixing my breathing calmed me down. I think I was doing that to myself. It calmed me down.
one important element that Wolf is alluding to is how people experience their breathing and then respond to that experience. That's an extremely important thing. For example, in women who are going through their menstrual cycles, as Lisa Kush, it's her specialty is working with women issues, pregnancy and menstrual cycles and so on. And one of the things that you see in a menstrual cycle is because of the hormones, you get an increased respiratory drive so that the woman breathes faster. Now, that doesn't cause them to overventilate. It just means they're breathing faster. Now, potentially, you can lose more carbon dioxide, but if your breaths are smaller, you don't. So you may have increased respiratory drive, you're breathing faster, but your CO2 levels are normal. But a certain number of women who in their menstrual cycles are hypocapnic, and women are more likely to be hypocapnic during their menstrual cycles than when they're not in their menstrual cycles. And you ask the question, why? Well, a lot of people say, oh, it's because of the hormone. If that's true, then all women would be overventilating and losing carbon dioxide when they're going through their menstrual cycles, and that's simply not true at all. So what you find is that when women they find themselves breathing rapidly and in a shallow way, that they then experience that as being problematic. They may judge it and say that, this is not good. Look how I'm breathing. That fast breathing can trigger emotions, not because of the autonomic nervous system, but because it's emotions are generally learned where they occur. Some people are afraid of dogs, like me. Other people think dogs are wonderful and their eyes open, they can hardly wait to hold the dog. The people learn all kinds of emotions in different situations. That's what life's about. You learn all these different things. And so that faster breathing then brings on an emotional shift, not because, oh, it's our autonomic nervous system that's being charged up because of the way you're breathing. You got to learn how to breathe slow. No, you need to learn how to breathe fast and shallow and be comfortable with it because there's an increase in respiratory drive. You got to let it happen, not try to block it, let it be. So, the explanation for it, although there's the physiological part of it, which is the hormones that will increase the respiratory drive, that doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be someone suffering with a low CO2 level and you just blame the hormone on it. It's the same thing in pregnancy. The idea is that you recognize that you have learned to respond to the way you breathe emotionally as well as cognitively, and that can be driving a dysfunctional breathing habit in a certain number of women. And when you average it all, you find that women, when they're in their menstrual cycles, are more likely to be suffering with a low CO2, hypocapnia, than when women are not in their menstrual cycles. And that's so important to understand. I
So
think
I
that's what
saw that,
Wolfgang is
yeah.
alluding to.
I saw that in the Facebook groups. People would say that their symptoms were worse during their cycles. So I definitely saw that. That was very common.
And I only pointed out because people overlook this behavioral part completely, rather than, I'm not saying I'm overlooking the body completely. Of course not. It'd be like saying with a computer that you don't address, the software is limited by virtue of, the computer you own and the operating system and, how much memory you have and what processors you have. You don't disregard the computer when you talk about programming on a computer. Obviously, it sets the stage for what's possible. It's the same thing with the body. Obviously, it sets the stage for what can be learned, what can be programmed and how it can be programmed and so on. No one is dismissing this. There are the hormones, they have their effects. There's no question about it. No one is arguing with this. It's the way it gets interpreted and misunderstood in the context of the human being that's there, that's a highly sophisticated learning system that feels and is alive and conscious, that gets overlooked. It's just, oh, it's the hormone. And if you can't find the hormone, it must not be real. So all your menstrual symptoms aren't real if they can't find a hormone. It's kind of like that. Anyway, lovely, Sandra. What do you, anything you want to mention?
Well, I'm appreciating what you were sharing, Lynn, about how you noticed many months later certain changes, like 3 months later, and in this Facebook group, but other people were also saying many months later they started noticing more different changes, physiological changes, or different challenges, or worse, exacerbated challenges. And it's also what I'm appreciating about that is the complexity when it comes to, oftentimes people will respond to what is an extreme challenge and they'll stay in that heightened state. But to be able to notice the subtleties of triggers, which we've been all talking about, and how those subtle shifts that happen during a day and a night cycle can be, they seem really subtle because where people might be in such an alarm state that there's a certain challenge in being able to sift through what those subtle shifts are that are triggering breathing behaviors that can be contributing. And to be able to tune into those nuances with a sense of appreciation for the complexity of physiology and how it does learn with or without our personality and what we do in response to that. It's a very dynamic relationship, and there's a lot to appreciate in that rather than to assume always the worst, and to learn and explore navigating in that space as a part of what it is to be human, and to uncover our relationship and our partnership with how we've learned to breathe in different context, situations, and responses. Because in many cases, it may seem like for some people, there's a delayed response. Like we've often shared about someone, certain clients we've had where after they recover, then they notice they'll start crying. So if CO2 levels are low, then they recover and then they cry or they emote and they have a lot of responses. It's not necessarily that in all cases that there's a delayed response. It can also be just developing and getting in touch with these subtleties so that you're in alignment and in partnership with breathing changes as they're happening in real time, because they are happening in real time. It's just we might not notice, right, until later. And we notice what we call a problem rather than our physiology sharing and showing us that there's change happening here and helping us become aware of what it is we're doing or how we're contributing to those changes so that we can move into more of a homeostasis or balance even when we're challenged. Yeah, because Peter, he loves telling the story about the lion who becomes afraid of rabbits. Or, you
Or you
mentioned,
mean the fox that becomes afraid
yeah,
of?
fox, lion, a
Yeah.
predator. Yeah, or a creature that is dynamic, it's out there, but it's learned to become afraid of something that it wouldn't normally become afraid of. And being afraid of our body, when it is our life mate. Um,
Yeah.
and it can
Well,
feel like,
people become afraid of their breathing, and so they avoid
yeah,
focusing on their breathing. And the first step with these people
yeah,
is to desensitize them to their own breathing, so they can learn to observe their breathing. Because a lot of people, as soon as they focus on their breathing, they start manipulating it rather than
yeah,
observing it. And when they do that, then they start to get symptoms and they become afraid of breathing. Now, we have a question here that someone asked. It says, "Are there therapists in Mexico City, in the DF, or a way to measure your CO2 levels without expensive equipment?" No, there is no way you can measure CO2 without equipment, but there is new equipment that's coming out for personal users that you can wear on your head, like this device I'm wearing right here. This is a headset. There's a new device coming out, looks just like that you can buy and use that much more less expensively than getting therapy from someone. It's like $995, and you've got a CO2 device you can use for life, and there's a book that comes with it and everything. But I'm not going to go into that here. But there is something, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can, email us, and we can steer you in the right direction. And our email address, well, you can email me, for example, at the school, which is B as in Bravo, P as in Papa, dot edu, bp dot, it's PL at bp.edu, my initials, Peter Litchfield, PL at B Bravo, uh, P Papa dot edu. And I can point you in a direction if you want to know about that. Anyway,
So I think the awareness, I mean, you have to have a tool. So as far as I know, the Cap No Go right now is the only one. But you have to have a tool, and Lisa has been such an asset helping me. But I think if you have a tool and you can see your own CO2 and you can experiment with what you're doing and what fixes it, how you can get it up, I think that's the key is, gosh, I think someday I hope when you go to the doctor, they ask you how your CO2 is, because me personally, I think it's that important. But you have to have a tool. And right now that's difficult, but
Well,
hopefully
one of the things
someday
that
it won't be.
in that is that they understand that it's not like you hook someone up and then you measure their CO2 level like blood pressure,
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
true.
triggered by specific times. If you look at it just like something to measure to see if it's normal, then you've missed the whole concept, which is it's about programming in the physiology. And to discover the programming, it's very specific. It isn't just a general thing. What's your blood pressure? I
So
mean, even that,
that's
you know
even
how
more important, that you've got to be able to monitor it, because it does change depending on how you're
radically,
breathing. So
radically.
all day long, my
Right.
my CO2 is different, and so you really need that tool. I mean, most people are fine, I'm sure. A lot of people are fine. But if you have a problem, you need that tool to see what is triggering it, what you're doing.
Mhm.
Definitely. So,
Lynn, I was curious because you're obviously you're active in various circles that people have similar symptoms or have been diagnosed with post-COVID or long COVID or so. How do people receive your story? How do they receive the breathing has made such a difference for you? Are people open to hear that? Are people interested? How do people respond to that, and how do you
So
feel?
I have not been active in those groups. Like I said, I'm more a stalker. I just watch them. I don't really have anything to contribute that's not already contributed. And that's what I'm hoping with this podcast. I'm going to go on and I'm going to say, just watch this. Just have an open mind and watch this, and consider, are you like me? Are your symptoms like mine? Because it's worth looking at. If you're desperate, it's worth looking at. I think that, I mean, it's life changing for me. I, it's life changing. I told Dr. Rama yesterday, 2 days ago, whenever I had my appointment, he has saved my life. I mean, it was bad. I mean, I cannot express how horrible it can be to have long COVID. And I was diagnosed with ME/CFS after long COVID. And I'm sure, I've always had a breathing problem. But these poor people with long COVID, ME/CFS, it can ruin their life. I mean, it can make them miserable, or it can get as bad as ruining their lives. They're in bed they can't do anything. People with, you know, masks on their eyes and headphones so they don't hear. And yeah, I hope, I hope this can go somewhere and people just see if this could be a problem for them. And it would be so interesting to do that. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this link in the Facebook groups, and we'll see what happens. I hope this can make a difference. That's all I want to do.
I'll give you an example of how relevant it can be is in the National Health Service. They've recently done some research where they found that, the NHS in the UK, that 34% of all the people who have been diagnosed with asthma have no biomarkers for asthma. That is, there's no physiological basis for the asthma, only to find that what the real factor was for this 34% was low CO2 levels. And that if you restore the normal CO2 level, 34% of that asthma population goes off the charts. So they're doing a major study right now with this new instrumentation that's being produced by Better Physiology Ltd, which is very inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, so that people can really get involved in learning how to learn good breathing habits to avoid these low levels of CO2. It's in progress. It's going to be a major kind of change in the way people think about unexplained symptoms and how breathing can be very involved in that.
A couple things I wanted to say too. My doctor questioned my CO2 in my blood is fine. My blood work is always fine. There's a CO2 marker, but that is not the same thing as the
Well,
CO2
you
that's
see,
from
they're
your
only looking
breath.
at it. They're only looking at it at that moment. That's what I'm saying is, if you just look at it there and say, oh,
Well,
it's
and
okay.
it's mostly bicarbonate, right? I mean, that's a totally different
Yeah, what they're doing
thing.
is they're making assumptions about CO2 based on bicarbonate, or vice versa. And you can't really do, those are two very different considerations. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm very involved in that physiology, and it's complex, and I'm not going to even attempt to say anything about that right here.
Okay. And then another thing Lisa always says to me is get your breathing fixed and see what symptoms are left to see what you're left with.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to have anything left.
Unfortunately, it's usually the other way around. Get your surgery, and then after surgery, if that
Oh
doesn't work,
gosh.
let's see if it's a behavioral problem. And you see that in dentistry. Uh, I've seen it many times where there's surgery that's been. I just talked to a dentist recently who we're very connected with, who told me a month ago. He said, I know a patient who received all this major surgery because of air hunger that they had. They couldn't get enough.
Oh my
They felt
gosh.
they couldn't get enough air, and the airway was narrower than it should have been. And so they went through all this surgery to no avail at all. There was no outcome
Mm.
because the programming involved, the understanding that air hunger is about claustrophobia was never addressed. You don't cure, so to speak, claustrophobia by doing surgery. And that's in essence what they had done.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Anything else? Anyone else want to say or anything? Thanks, Lynn, for your summary of how important you think this is. We really appreciate your coming here and passing on your personal experience that may motivate people to really learn to do something about the symptoms they have rather than feeling like a victim all the time.
Thank you for having me on. I hope this makes a difference. Yeah, this
We
is
may
this
have
has
you
been
back
great.
another time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Lynn.
you.
You.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
All right, so Keikishaw, we're signing off.
Okay, beta.